August 1945. Deep in the mountains of central Japan, the Second World War is over, but news travels slowly here. American survey teams step carefully through narrow openings blasted into solid rock. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing long, damp corridors reinforced with concrete, steel, and wood. The air is cool, still. Machinery sits exactly where it was left. Lathes, presses, rail carts, all silent, all unused. In some chambers, the ceilings soar high enough to swallow a warehouse. The only sounds are dripping water and the crunch of boots on the ground. Nothing here was ever bombed. Nothing here ever fired a shot. And yet thousands of men labored here in total secrecy for years. Gradually, the purpose of this place becomes clear. These aren't just shelters or mines. This is a ghost world. The remains of a vast, hidden military empire built directly beneath Japan itself during the final, desperate years of the war. By 1943, the tide had turned against Japan. The Imperial Navy had suffered catastrophic losses at Midway and Guadalcanal. Allied submarines were strangling Japan's supply lines. And most critically, American long-range bombers. The B-29 superfortresses were beginning to pound the home islands from their bases in the Marianas. Factories, shipyards, and arsenals on the surface were sitting ducks. So, Japanese military planners came up with a radical solution. If you can't survive above ground, you move below it. Mountains offered a level of protection that no concrete bunker could match. Going underground meant hiding from reconnaissance planes, resisting even the heaviest bombs, and continuing war production no matter what. What started as a few scattered projects soon became a massive nationwide effort. By the end of the war, Japan had started building hundreds of underground facilities. We're talking about aircraft assembly halls, engine factories, ammunition depots, cavernous fuel storage tanks, naval command centers, and even emergency bunkers for the government itself. Some were designed to support a guerrilla-style resistance after an Allied invasion. Others were intended as the final fallback for the imperial leadership. The sheer scale of this undertaking was incredible, especially considering Japan's dwindling resources. These secret complexes were carved into mountainsides all across the country. Tunnels stretched for more than a kilometer into solid rock. Some chambers were over 40 meters wide, with ceilings soaring 15 meters high. A few were even large enough to assemble entire aircraft indoors, completely hidden from the sky. But this wasn't a high-tech operation. With fuel and machinery in short supply, most of the digging was done by hand. Tens of thousands of workers, military engineers, civilian laborers, conscripted students, and Korean force laborers toiled around the clock with little more than drills, picks, and limited explosives. Conditions were brutal. Cave-ins were common, ventilation was poor, and the casualty rate was tragically high. The ambition went far beyond just factories. Underground naval headquarters were built with reinforced command rooms and map tables carved directly into stone, complete with their own power generators. Gigantic caverns were excavated to store aviation gasoline and naval fuel oil, some holding over 100,000 cubic meters. Entire railway lines were even diverted underground to move materials without being spotted from the air. The plan was to create a network that could sustain the war even if every city in Japan was reduced to rubble. There were even underground hospitals, barracks, and water systems built to support thousands of soldiers for months on end. In theory, it was a brilliant strategy for survival. But in reality, it was a race against time that Japan was losing badly. The geology was often unstable, leading to constant collapses. The ventilation systems were rarely adequate, making work dangerous and inefficient. Power was unreliable as Allied bombing destroyed the surface grids. Getting heavy machinery underground was a nightmare, requiring it to be taken apart piece by piece and then reassembled. But the most critical problem was time. When the war ended, many of these underground fortresses were only partially finished. You'd find aircraft assembly halls without enough engines, engines without fuel, and fuel that couldn't be transported. The underground world couldn't fix the total collapse of Japan's wider industrial system. By mid-1945, shortages of raw materials like aluminum and steel meant that large-scale production was impossible anyway. Whether it happened above ground or below, for a while, Allied intelligence was in the dark. Reconnaissance planes spotted tunnel entrances, but they couldn't tell what they were for or how vast the network was. It wasn't until after Japan's surrender that American occupation forces began a systematic investigation. Engineers and intelligence officers fanned out across the country, documenting what they found. What struck them most was the stark contrast between the monumental ambition and the unfinished reality. They found huge, impressively engineered complexes that were functionally useless. Aircraft factories with half-built planes that had never seen the sky. Naval fuel caverns that were either empty or contaminated. Command bunkers that were structurally sound but never equipped. In some cases, Japanese officers even gave guided tours, explaining the grand plans that had never made it off the paper. After the initial surveys, the question was what to do with these places. Post-war Japan was facing desperate shortages of housing and food. Maintaining these secret military bases served no purpose. Most were in remote locations, structurally unstable, and would have been expensive to repurpose. The occupation authorities ordered the majority of them to be dismantled or abandoned. Machinery was scrapped, steel was salvaged, and many tunnels were sealed with concrete or deliberately collapsed to prevent accidents. There was little interest in preserving them. They were symbols of a lost war, a militarized past that the new Japan wanted to leave behind. Unlike the ruins of bombed-out cities, these complexes were invisible, hidden from daily life. By the early 1950s, most of the entrances were overgrown, forgotten. Looking back, historians see these underground complexes as a product of desperation, not sound strategy. They showed incredible engineering skill under extreme pressure, but they also revealed the hard limits of fortification. Protection is useless without production. For military planners in the Cold War, however, they offered valuable lessons. The US and the Soviet Union both studied what was found in Japan and incorporated underground construction into their own plans for missile silos and command centers. Today, these silent spaces are a physical reminder of Japan's final, grim calculations. They represent an attempt to win a war through concealment when victory on the battlefield was no longer possible. But they were built too late. They never truly influenced the war. If you were to go back to those tunnels today, the silence would be overwhelming. You can still see chalk markings on the concrete walls, faded numbers from a lifetime ago. Rusted rails disappear into the darkness. These places were built to sustain a war that could no longer be sustained. They were designed for survival, but they arrived too late to matter. Buried beneath the earth, Japan's secret underground world flickered into existence, unseen and unfinished. And when the war finally ended, it didn't explode or collapse. It simply stopped. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into a forgotten chapter of history interesting, please like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. See you next time.